Hello history fans and welcome back to the podcast that helps you learn a little bit of history. Today is another episode of Myths and Makeup. So if you're listening, I'm just going to be chatting to you about the story of Heracles/Hercules because oh my god, how exciting is it that they've announced it's coming to the West End as a show. I'm so excited. I've even got my Hercules top on and if you're watching, I'm going to be doing my makeup as we chat. So we've gone orange today because he's Ginger in the Disney version, and he does wear a lion's head and skin for most of his mythology stories, so that's kind of orangey, yellowy. Hopefully you understand the vibe. If you're listening, don't forget to follow the podcast and download it to listen on the go if you feel like it. And if you're watching, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. And without further ado, let's get into some history. As with a lot of heroes from Greek mythology, Heracles came from Zeus's union with a mortal woman. This time it was Alcmene, who was actually the granddaughter of another hero, Perseus. So it's in his bloodline already, he's quite heroic. Oh, and Heracles is the original Greek version. Hercules is the popularised Roman version. So Zeus has Heracles, Jupiter has Hercules, but it's the same story of heroicness and basically the exact same story, it's just different names. So if I keep switching, I do apologise. It would just be out of habit, but sometimes I'll say Heracles, sometimes I'll say Hercules. Zeus disguises himself as Alcmene's husband's Amphitryon and manages to sleep with her the exact same night that her husband does. So 9 months later she has twin boys. Iphicles is Amphitryon's and Heracles is Zeus's, but of course she doesn't know that. Until one day Hera, Zeus's wife, who is rightfully so furious that he's had another child without her, decides that she's going to find out which one of the children she needs to be horrible to, essentially, and she puts snakes in their cribs. Iphicles cries and Heracles strangles the snakes and kills them, so it's obvious which one Hera now needs to get to. But even before the snakes, Hera had sort of screwed with Heracles anyway, because before he was born, Hera made Zeus promise that the next child to be born of the house of Perseus, so the next descendant of Perseus to be born, would become a high king. And Zeus agrees, thinking, great, that's going to be my son Heracles. But Hera then orders her daughter Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, to delay the birth of Heracles until Eurystheus is born, and he will become important later on in our story. Also, apologies for mispronunciations of any of these names. They're quite difficult to sound out sometimes. Growing up, Heracles has the best tutors in everything, in chariot racing, wrestling, archery, boxing, arts, music, and all of his tutors seem to be very important men with strong connections to people like Odysseus and Hermes, and eventually Heracles would grow stronger and better than all of them, which is really quite impressive. And by the time he's 18, he's killed the lion, Cytherion, and has apparently fathered over 50 children in quite a silly story, really. Basically, the lion of Mount Cytherion was eating the flocks of Amphitryon and the king of Thespius, so Heracles hunts it, and it does take him 50 days, but eventually he manages to kill it, and he dresses himself in the lion's skin and wears the head as a helmet ever since, which is an image you're probably aware of if you know mythology. But the king was so astounded by the boy that he wanted each of his daughters to have his child, or children, because there's multiple. So every night he sent a different daughter to Heracles, and apparently Heracles thought it was the same one, so was happy to just keep sleeping with her. But realistically, surely you know that's not the same woman, and I think Hercules is just a little bit of a slag. But I suppose if you're being sent a different princess every night, you'd be silly to say no. Then Heracles was met by the herald of Erginus, who had been sent over by the Minoan king to collect the Thebans' yearly tribute of 100 cows. Is it Minoan? Because honestly it just looks like the word minion, but I don't want to say the minion king, so I'm going to just... The Minoan king, I'm sure, is fine. Anyway, he decides to cut off their ears, noses and hands, and he ties them up with ropes around their neck, which of course infuriates Erginus, who then sends over the Menaian army, who Heracles kills, and consequently makes the Menaians pay Thebes back double the original tribute that they were giving in the first place. So far, Heracles has done an awful lot of good for Thebes. So, yet again, another king is pleased with Heracles and offers his daughter Megara to be his wife, and they would go on to have 3 sons for definite, although some sources say they had 8 children. And the end of her story is always relatively the same, it's just the journey of how we get there differs. Sometimes it's fairly early on into the marriage that Hera sends Heracles mad and he throws his children onto a fire, but the most common version of the story is the same told by the Greek playwright Euripides or the Roman philosopher Seneca, and it says that after Heracles went to capture Cerberus as one of his labours, he came back to find a usurper on the throne of Thebes, who he then kills before Hera sends a madness onto him, meaning he killed his children thinking they're usurpers too, and Megara thinking she was Hera, until Athena stops him by knocking him out, and he then wakes up to Theseus, who stops him committing suicide because of what he's done. He tells Heracles to go into exile, where he travels to Delphi, and the oracle tells him to serve Eurystheus. Remember the child from the house of Perseus we mentioned before? He has to serve him, the king of Tyrans, for 12 years, and perform any task he asks to atone for his horrid actions. If Heracles did this, he would then be immortal, and so we reach the labours of Hercules. Originally there's 10 labours, but 2 get discounted, so we end up with 12. So we have the 12 labours that make Heracles the greatest ancient Greek hero. The first labour was to bring the king Eurystheus the skin of the lion that had been terrorising the hills of Nemea, and so Heracles went to get the lion, but his arrows didn't work, so he ended up chasing it with his club before strangling or choking the lion to death. And when he returned, the king was so terrified of him for completing this seemingly impossible task that he decided that Heracles was no longer allowed to enter the city gates, and that he would only communicate with him through a herald from there forward. Next, he had to kill the Lernaean hydra that was terrorising the countryside with its 9 heads, one of them being immortal. So, for this one, Heracles took along his nephew Iolaus, and it turns out they were together for a few of the adventures. So, Heracles used a flaming torch to get the hydra out of its little lair, but the hydra coiled around his foot so he was unable to move. He kept bashing the heads with his club, but every time he bashed one, a new head would form. So in came his nephew Iolaus with another flaming torch. Every time Heracles whacked off a head, Iolaus used the flames to kill the next so another one couldn't spawn, and by the time they got to the immortal one, they chopped it off and buried it at the side of the road under a rock. But Heracles made sure to dip his arrows into its poisoned blood, because that's going to be really important later on. But because his nephew had helped him, Eurystheus discounted that task, saying that it wasn't impressive at all because he had help. The third labour was to collect the hind of the doe of Chaeronea, a female deer, which is just a deer from that specific place. But it's even more special because it was the pet of Diana or Artemis, a deer with golden hooves and bronze horns. He hunted the creature for a year before he was actually able to capture it, and he ended up just trying to carry it back to Eurystheus, but he was stopped in his tracks by Artemis or Diana and Apollo, who were of course really angry that he'd tried to kill the deer. But Heracles explained the prophecy and what was going on, and because Diana is the best, she decides to let Heracles take the deer back to the king, but she heals its wounds first. Next came the task of the Erymanthian boar, which Heracles had to bring Eurystheus alive. So Heracles is on his way, travelling to the mountain Eurystheus. No, that's the name of the king. He's travelling to Erymantheus when he stops on his way to visit his centaur friend Pholus. They had some dinner together, and then Heracles wanted some wine, but Pholus said they couldn't open it because it belonged to all the centaurs as a group. Heracles, of course, didn't really care, and decided to open it, and lo and behold, all the other centaurs come in, fuming that someone is drinking their group wine. They came storming in, angry with rocks, so Heracles starts chasing them with his club and shooting them with his poisoned arrows, one of which hits Chiron, the best centaur, and wounds him in an unhealable way. Well, because they're poisoned from the hydra, we spoke about before. But I think Chiron was immortal, so he's not going to die. He's just going to be wounded and in pain forever. And Pholus, the friend, finds one of the arrows, and it's just like, how on earth is this killing such a huge creatures? How is it killing all my centaur friends? And he drops it on his foot and instantly dies because of the poison. So Heracles carries on up the mountain, somehow chases and tricks the boar into a giant net and carries it all the way back to the Mycenae, or Mycenae. I don't know why I'm struggling so much with pronunciations today, but it carries it all the way back to the king, who is once again astounded at how great Heracles must be and is just so completely terrified of him. So we're on to number 5, and we should really be almost halfway through by now, but this time he was ordered to clean out King Augeas's stable, which was an issue because he owned the most cattle in the entirety of ancient Greece. So Heracles went to Augeas, didn't mention that he had actually been ordered to do it, and said, hey, if I clean out your stables in one day, can I have 1/10 of your cattle? And he agrees to it. So Heracles makes huge openings on either sides of the yards, and then just diverts the course of the nearby river to flow all the way through it quickly using trenches, and so the river runs through the yard and cleans it really, really quickly. But Augeas finds out that Eurystheus actually ordered Heracles to do it and refuses to give him the cattle, so Heracles takes him to court. Which was actually quite a big mistake on Heracles' part, because although he does end up getting paid, because Augeas' son actually backs him in court, so he does get the cattle. But they both then get banished, and Eurystheus then knows that he got paid for his work technically, so that doesn't count as a labour. We are now actually halfway with labour number 6, which was to get rid of the Stymphalian birds. And how do you drive away a gigantic flock of birds from the place of Stymphalius? Who knows, Heracles didn't either, but Athena comes by to help him. She gives Heracles a giant bronze pair of crotala, which is like noise-making clappers, like a huge percussion instrument basically, forged by Hephaestus, god of blacksmiths. So it's extra special, extra noisy, and he manages to drive the birds away with the noise and then shoots them with the arrows. So they're gone, they're out of the town. Then labour number 7 is the Cretan bull, which is actually an interesting story in itself. So Poseidon sent the king of Crete, Minos, the bull as a sacrifice. So he was like, you can have this great bull, but you have to then sacrifice it to me. Because Minos wanted to prove his right to the throne, and apparently Poseidon doing that proved it. But he then said it was too beautiful to sacrifice, so Poseidon sent it on a rampage. So it's rampaging Crete, and then the king's wife falls in love with it and has a child with it, which gives us the Minotaur. But our part of the story, Heracles wrestles it, tackles it to the ground, takes it back to Eurystheus, who then just decides to let it roam free about Greece and Athens, I think. So just a completely pointless task. Like, what was the reason if you're just going to free it again? And then we have Heracles capturing the man-eating horses of Diomedes. He takes some volunteers with him on the journey, sailing across to Bistonia, according to Apollodorus. But according to Euripides, he's alone. In the latter story, Diomedes has the 4 horses already harnessed to a chariot, so Heracles just takes that pretty easy task. But in other versions, they fight a group of soldiers before Heracles kills Diomedes, fed him to the horses, and then took them back with him to the king. Once again, Eurystheus makes it pointless by freeing them all to roam, until eventually they get to Mount Olympus, where they're eaten by the other god animals. I sprayed myself, so I'm going to let that sit for a minute. But we're almost at the end with number 9. So Heracles had to take the belt of Hippolyte, but apparently it's Hippolyte. The queen of the Amazonians, the tribe of warrior women. She had been given the belt by Ares, god of war, because she was of course the greatest warrior. Eurystheus wanted to give it to his daughter. Heracles was joined by some friends who knew he couldn't fight them alone, and they set sail, being met on the other side by Hippolyte herself. He told her why they were there, and she somehow agreed to give him the belt. But Hera was about to mess things up again. She disguised herself as an Amazonian and told everyone they were going to take away their queen. When he saw them coming to attack, he killed Hippolyte, and to be honest, I don't really understand why. Like, surely if she had just been there and said, no, don't worry, he's not a threat, he's not taking me away, then that would have been better than just killing her so she couldn't help them. But instead, they all have to fight them, and eventually they do get away with the belt somehow. Then comes the cattle of Geryon, a monster, or Geryon, or Gerion, a monster with 3 legs and 3 heads living at the end of the world. On this journey he created the Great Gates, or the Pillars of Hercules, either by building the 2 mountains or splitting one in 2, on the spot where Libya meets Europe, as a commemoration for his long journey, and then he carried on to Erythea, or Eurythia. He fought other monsters who were there protecting their cattle easily, and almost had escaped with the cattle when Gerion heard of it and attacked him, but of course Heracles shot him with his arrows. End of story. But on the journey home, things started going wrong. One of the bulls escaped and swam to the place next to Sicily, which would then become Italy, after the bull, whose name in their language was Italus. Little interesting change for you there. At this point, we're 8 years in, so we better start cracking on with things, because we've already had 2 discounted, and Heracles is just going to have to keep serving the king until he's done, so come on, hurry up, finish your jobs. The next one was to collect the golden apples of Zeus, which had been given to him as a wedding present from Hera. So I'm sure Eurystheus thought this was going to be an impossible task. Well, he thought the rest were, that's why he's so scared of Heracles anyway. So, the golden apples. They're on the other edge of the world, guarded by Ladon, the 100-headed dragon, and the Hesperides nymphs. It's a long journey, trying to find the garden where the apples are. He stopped near Kyknos, having to fight the son of Ares, and eventually finds Nereus, a sea god, who can tell him where to go. But the sons of Poseidon cause problems, one by fighting him, and another by capturing and trying to sacrifice him. Then Heracles found Prometheus and killed the eagle that was torturing him. So Prometheus told him the secret. Get Atlas to collect the apples, and while he does, Heracles will hold the weight of the world for him. Atlas comes back with the apples and says, "Oh, don't worry, I'll take them to Eurystheus for you. You just keep holding the world," which obviously Heracles doesn't fall for. But he says, "Okay, but could you just hold it for a second so I can put some padding on my shoulders?" Atlas takes back the weight of the world, and Heracles legs it out of there. So finally we get to the last task, to kidnap Cerberus, the creature of the underworld. He made his way there with minimal blips before finding Hades, god of the underworld, and just asking him to take Cerberus, which he said yes to, but only if he could overpower the creature just with his strength, which of course he does, which is more impressive than you might initially think, because I don't know about you, but Harry Potter killed the scariness of Cerberus for me. It's not just a 3-headed dog, right? He does have 3 wild dog heads up top, yes, but his tail is like a dragon or a huge snake, and there's also heads of snakes all up his back. So yeah, more scary than I think pop culture leads us to believe. And he's wrestled it to the ground, takes it to Eurystheus, and then returns it to Hades. Done. Sorted. 12 legendary heroic stories. But he doesn't stop there, and there's other heroic adventures he has, like joining Jason and the Argonauts for a bit. He goes to his old archery teacher, Epithius, and wins his daughter Iole's hand in marriage in an archery competition. But Epithus says no, so Heracles kills him and his son. And because he's a murderer again, he gets a disease, so goes to the Oracle of Delphi for help, who tells him nothing. So he goes to break the tripod that the Oracle is on. So Apollo comes down to stop him, and then they fight until Zeus separates them with a thunderbolt. And he's destined to be a slave again, to repent for his murder, this time to the Queen of Libya, Omphale, although it's said that Hera had sent him mad to cause the murder again too anyway, so... But the Queen would make him do needlework, and then took him as a lover, and then set him free, so not really too awful. He then helps Zeus in the Titan War that's happening in Sicily, saving the Olympians. I've just realised I've not completely finished. I just started reading the script, and I've not done lip gloss on my hair. Let's sort that out. Sorry, video watchers. That last bit wasn't fun. There we go. We can carry on with the podcast now. Then he marries Deianira, who was attacked by the centaur Nessus. So Heracles kills him with the poisoned arrows. But as he's dying, Nessus convinces Deianira to keep his shirt covered in blood and hence poison, to use as a love charm on Heracles should she need it in the future. In other stories, she just takes a vial of his blood rather than a t-shirt. So when she thinks, slash knows really, that he is in love with Iole, she gives him the shirt, and when he puts it on, he is of course in horrific poisoned pain. And of course, being a demigod, he can't die quickly, so he builds himself a funeral pyre and waits for his friends to light it, after which he was taken to Olympus and made a deity, and there he takes his third wife, Hebe. But how? Well, as he was just burning alive, Hera agreed with Zeus that he had suffered enough, so Athena brought him to Olympus, or in other stories Zeus had him enveloped in a cloud, where he then lives among the stars. But what's the point of all this? Well, the greatest of ancient heroes, the epitome of masculine strength and bravery, is intertwined in so many of the stories from mythology, and yet still ends up defeated by a lover, essentially. Not a monster, just saying. For the ancients, he was the perfect display of manhood, and something I remember from uni was his sculptures are also the perfect male form and proportions. Obviously, the ancient Greeks loved their perfectionism, which is why their buildings are meticulously square, but also why pretty much all the male sculptures followed this same form of the perfect, strong, masculine body. And with that, I think that's your basic intro into Heracles, or Hercules. Sorry for just reading from the script at the end there, but if this was just a podcast, you'd never know. The video is a bonus. Thank you all so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed. If you did and you're watching, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening, please do follow the podcast and rate it as many stars as you think I deserve. Please 5, because that research took such a long time. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.